Nota luctuosa.
Ha fallecido en Mocoa la niña Elayna Fernández. Sus restos están siendo velados en la funeraria local. That was the daily verse that started the most important quest of my life. Little Elayna Fernández has died in the city of San Jose de Ocoa. Her remains are being laid to rest at the local funeral home. I was only 5 years old, and my deepest desire was to die. I have heard so many times, you deserve to suffer. You shouldn't even be alive. And a part of me believed it. So the voices of the people around me became the voices in my head. I fantasized about dying every single day. And at night, I would make sure everyone was asleep so I could write about my death until I collapsed. I wrote it in the blank spaces of my Bible as if to cry out to God a prayer that it would come true. Death seemed like the only escape of the horrors I experienced. But my heart sank when I opened my eyes early in the morning and I was still alive and in trouble again because I was too trágica y emocional. Dramatic, tragic, emotional. I was accused of seeking attention. And guess what? It was true. Like everyone in this world, like you, I wanted to be significant. But soon I learned that talking about pain didn't work. Nobody wanted to talk about pain or poverty. And one day, sitting in front of a 12-inch black and white TV, crushing on El Príncipe de la Colina, the dreamy love interest in my favorite anime, I heard him say, "Eres mucho más linda cuando te ríes que cuando lloras. You are much prettier when you smile than when you cry." And I would hear las señoras mexicanas, the very, very well-regarded ladies in town, say, "Calladita, te ves más bonita. When you're quiet, you look more beautiful." Smile in silence. I was not considered pretty to begin with, and the odds were not in my favor. Until I walked many kilometers to the library and I found self-help books that taught me the secret to make friends and influence people. Smiling and suppressing. I learned that if I denied, dismissed, and downplayed my pain, I would be acceptable. And if you're honest with yourself right now, you learn that too. And soon I learned 2 ways that I could be significant even though I wasn't pretty enough. Being smart and being successful. And so I did what we've been told is the same thing. To attach our identity and our worth to possessions, position, and performance. And that's where I was at 13 years old, pushing myself, proving myself, and people pleasing. When the thoughts of suicide turned into suicidal behavior. Because I had notebooks filled with positive thinking, roses, and butterflies, little butterflies. So I didn't have any outlet for the darkness that often overcame me. Scratch that. the darkness that often overcomes me. 3 decades later, I still struggle with those thoughts. Only now, I give myself permission to write about them, just like when I was a little girl, and to give my suicidal parts a voice. I have notebooks filled with suicidal thoughts, thorns, and bats. Don't worry, just figuratively this time. Because suicidal thoughts are a cry for help. Thorns are a protective mechanism. And bats, their role in nature is essential to many ecosystems. And they're cute if you look at little things. And so, what I learned is that our quest to mask and fix and numb our pain is keeping us stuck in it. You are not too emotional. You are not too dramatic. You are not too tragic. You just have a few parts that need a little bit of attention, recognition, and validation. Parts that you've been burying for years in your quest to be acceptable and hopefully even significant. These parts carry rage, shame, fear, and extreme sadness that they need your help to release. And I know you can give them a voice through poetry. I call it parts poetry. I didn't know this as a little girl, but writing my eulogy, my death announcement, my obituary, and writing about my desire to rest in peace through death were always in which I told the stories of the most wounded parts of myself to give them attention, recognition, and validation. My poetry didn't just help me survive, it actually gave me a place where all of me was acceptable, so I could finally be significant. When we validate the wounded parts of ourselves, our wounds become wholeness. When I wrote my first poetry book, it didn't start as a best-selling project. I actually didn't even know if I was going to share my poems with anyone other than my daughters. I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, sat on my couch when everyone was asleep with a cup of herbal hot tea, ready for my date with fame. I started having an inner conversation with different younger versions of myself. I apologized to them for neglecting them for so long, and then I let them know that I was excited to know them, willing to understand their role in helping me cope, and also ready to help them tell their stories. As I listened with compassionate curiosity, I wrote poems about those stories. Stories like being in a coma, being kidnapped, raped, almost beaten up to death, and so many more stories of violence and invalidation that I hadn't fully processed yet. I learned to talk to those parts from the countless crisis counselors I have chatted with over the years, whose attention, recognition, and validation helped me survive the darkest times of my life. After I wrote each poem, I shed a sea of salty tears, and the sense of relief, release, and self-acceptance was like nothing I'd ever experienced. And that's why I'm here, because I want that experience for you. You see, expressive writing is one of the most efficient and easiest ways to process your pain, and probably one of the cheapest too. In writing poetry, you can give a voice to memories, feelings, thoughts that might feel too scary to share with anyone else. The pain might feel too raw, or it might feel like it's too taboo or too heavy because of the stigma, shame, and harmful stereotypes in society. As a word nerd, I love discovering that the word poem in Chinese is a combination of two characters, word and temple. So I believe that a poem is a sacred healing ritual through words. And it's a place where every part of ourselves is welcome to show up as is. You can be tragic, you can be dramatic, and over-the-top emotional, whether it's a pleasant or painful emotion, and just bask in it. My experiences with poetry have helped me live through severe depression and complex post-traumatic stress disorder because it gives me the courage to become an empathetic witness to myself. And I'm not alone in this experience. Actually, research shows that there's a positive effect of poetry therapy in veterans, even those veterans who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. I have read countless very, very inspiring stories of veterans who have found meaning and purpose through pain, through poetry. And because I'm a musical theater geek, let me tell you about Bandstand. It's a Tony Award-winning show set in 1945 in which one of the characters copes with the aftermath of war through poetry. I promise I won't spoil it for you, but here's a line that I really, really love. She says, "They're just little poems, but writing them helps me get through it all." Through it all refers to grief, guilt, shame, depression, addiction, and suicide. There's nothing little about that. Now, can you already see how poetry could be good for our mental health? But wait, there's more. I'm a partner and contributor to the amazing work my dear friends at the American Academy of Pediatrics do to prevent and buffer adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. In 2021, they published a study that demonstrates really well how poetry can be therapeutic. A few dozen hospitalized children received a poetry writing kit with pens, paper, marker, writing prompts, and a few poems to read. The findings indicate that poetry helped them navigate challenging emotions, reducing fear, anger, sadness, worry, and even fatigue. It also helped them actually cultivate self-reflection. There's evidence that proves that poetry and the plain and simple language of poetry speaks to our mind in ways that escape consciousness. And we all know that proverbs and verses have been helping people live through it all since the beginning of time. I want to emphasize a very important lesson we can all learn here. Poetry is accessible to everyone. Even though I started writing autobiographical poetry as a little girl, even little than now, writing poetry in English as an adult felt daunting. A part of me felt like I couldn't do it right, and another part of me felt a valid fear that bringing back past trauma would bring back the hopelessness, emptiness, and powerlessness that came with it. But I remember how in writing poetry about my death as a child, I got to imagine that I mattered. I wrote about how loved I had been, what a difference I had made in the world, how many people mourned my loss and even showed up to my funeral. Because poetry is a place where reality and imagination collide. Hope and despair can coexist. Painful and pleasant emotions can have a voice without judgment or room for misunderstanding. And what's really, really liberating is that there's no rules for art. You can write in any form or style, in first person, second person, third person, in the past tense, in the present tense, or both. Writing your truth in your own unique way. Oh, and I better say this. You don't have to wake up at 5 a.m. to do it.
We write not to fix or ease our pain, but to feel it. And we've all experienced emotional pain. I always say that pain is the common thread of humanity. And I believe the reason we all experience pain is because pain demands presence. And in presence, we find love. And isn't that the ultimate significance? It goes beyond anything we can achieve or acquire.
That's why for the past 10 years, I've been helping others process their pain through words. Creating spaces that are safe for them to courageously give a voice to versions of themselves that couldn't comprehend what happened, or maybe failed to find the words, or just didn't feel acceptable. And I've seen them emerge with a sense of purpose, inner peace, freedom, and worth. In sharing our lived experiences in our own terms, we find the wisdom that El Príncipe de la Colina didn't know. There's enough room for smiling and crying. And there's beauty in both. It's not about smiling through the pain, but in being present with it so that we can genuinely smile again. And that there's beauty in being calladita, only if we choose to.
The paradox of the epic adventure we call life is that we spend much of it adapting in the search for acceptance outside of ourselves, and the only way to feel significant is to return to our truest and most divine nature.
My invitation to you today is to start your own arts poetry practice. Setting just a few minutes every day to be present with the most sensitive parts within you that want to be felt, heard, and known. And to give them a voice and to share their sacred stories through words. And if you choose to share your poetry, your vulnerability will liberate others. Because tragic, emotional, dramatic words are not only transformative and life-saving, they bring people together. I see this in my community every single day. So, I'm going to leave you with this mantra that I share with the younger versions of myself and that I hope is in my eulogy. Don't make yourself wrong for seeking attention, recognition, and validation. Make yourself whole by finding them within.